So now, without further ado, we would like to open today with our final storyteller, and we are going to be joined on the stage by Rachel Schneider for the Center for Financial Services Innovation. And this is a very impressive group that is basically taking a slice here in the banking and financial services industry in the United States and pushing the biggest financial institutions to figure out how to innovate around financial services. Please join me in welcoming Rachel.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great. Good morning. This is my first Shared Value Leadership Summit, and I can tell you it won't be my last. This is a fantastic community, and I really appreciated all of the examples I heard, the ideas I heard, and the conversations I had with many of you yesterday. So I'm actually going to tell you two stories. The first story, and as I tell the stories, I'd like for you to think about how these stories connect to your own work. So the first story I'm going to tell is about Sarah and Sam Johnson. Sarah and Sam, if you live or work in the developed world, should be a pretty familiar couple. They are middle class. They have 2 cars, a house. This is a second marriage for both of them, so they each have a child from a prior marriage who's almost grown, and then they have a younger daughter together. They're deeply involved in their community. And Sarah, in particular, I think of as a doer, right? When her youngest daughter was 3 or 4, she really wanted to play sports. And there was no good sports program in their neighborhood. The nearest one was a 20-minute drive. It was expensive. Sarah thought the coaching was bad. So she started her own program. And she convinced the school board to turn it into a fundraiser for the older kids' sports program who were having a hard time making their program work. They became the coaches, right? She is just a phenomenal, action-oriented person. And from outside, their life looks like it's going pretty well. But I had the luxury of getting to know their lives even more deeply. I'm a co-principal investigator on a research project called the U.S. Financial Diaries. And the Diaries is, if you work internationally, you may have heard of its predecessor project, which is led to a book called Portfolios of the Poor. But it's a very deep effort to understand the financial lives of struggling families. And I'm working with this project with Jonathan Mordock from NYU. And it's a research dive that could not have been done without pretty serious philanthropic backing. The Ford Foundation, the Citi Foundation, and the Omidyar Network partnered with us for years in order to get this done. And what we did is we gathered detailed information about over 200 families across the US for a year. And we gathered in total 300,000 transactions. But more importantly, we sat across the table from people. We had field researchers going to talk with them in person. And what we learned was something really important about the financial lives of Americans. We learned that people have extraordinary volatility in their income. Even if they have enough over the course of a year, they often have moments where bills are due today and they're not getting paid till next week. And what do I do in between? And we also know from other research that in the US, almost half of Americans say that they could not come up with $400 if they had an emergency. It's not a very big amount of money, $400. And yet, half of Americans say they would have to sell something or borrow from somebody in order to get that money if they needed it. And when you combine that with the volatility that we see in the diaries, it's pretty extraordinary. So we thought about volatility in terms of spikes and dips away from an average. And so if you think about being 25% above or below your average income as being a moment of volatility, what we saw was that in almost half the months of a year, on average, the households we were working with had either high or low income. And that puts tremendous pressure on their ability to budget, their ability to save for the future, their ability to think long term, their ability to plan. And when you combine that with the lack of cushion indicated by that $400 number, you begin to have a picture of why Americans are so financially fragile and why they are struggling with issues of instability, even though we are the wealthiest nation in the world, right? And that really plays out for Sarah and Sam Johnson. And the way it plays out for them is interesting. And I caught up with Sarah last summer, a few years after we had finished the diaries research, asked some follow-up questions. And she had so much good stuff to report. She was no longer running the sports program herself because it had 100 kids enrolled, and she was able to turn over the day-to-day management to somebody else. She had gone back to college a few years ago, and when I spoke with her, she had just graduated at the age of 40. And she had applied for new jobs, which she thought would double her income. Her oldest son, who had graduated as valedictorian of his class, was 2 years into college, doing great. But she had also declared bankruptcy. And she had no idea how she was going to get out from under the debt cycle that she was living in. And she made a joke about it. She said, you know, I graduated from college, my income might double, but all that extra money is going to go to debt for the rest of my life. And she, you know, it was sort of that gallows humor. She felt like that was, what could you do except laugh? And that's what she said, really. So now I'm going to tell you a second story. This is a story about a guy named Jerry. So Jerry grew up in Haiti, and he grew up poor, and he says for him, financial distress is a personal and a professional issue. He really understood what it's like to suffer from financial challenges. But he was very lucky. He got a great education. He moved to the US. He became a banker. And during the financial crisis, he looked around and he thought, there's something more I should be doing. In particular, he had this thought around the tremendous sophistication that exists in our financial services industry in the US, and how that sophistication and that ingenuity was not being brought to bear on the challenges of over-indebted households. So he decided he would try and fix that. He looked at problems like Sarah's, and he said, you know, this is a lose-lose-lose. This is Sarah's in bankruptcy, and the bank's not getting their money back, and society has lost so much in the way of potential. And so what he did is he created a business called Lend Street. The way Lend Street works is that Sarah could borrow from Lend Street, and he essentially takes the risk that Sarah will pay him back. And he goes and negotiates, Lend Street negotiates with the banks to figure out what amount they'd like to be paid back. Anything's better than the nothing they're going to get when Sarah declares bankruptcy. And Lend Street is very intentional about making sure that the payment plans they devise with borrowers are affordable. And over time, most of Lend Street's customers are finding themselves able to be free of debt within 4 years. Within a year, they're seeing improvements in their credit scores in the 100-point range. They're paying less back than they otherwise would have had to pay. And so what Jerry's been able to do with Lend Street is turn this lose-lose-lose into a win-win-win. And that's really what shared value is about, right? And what he saw was not only a tremendous social challenge, but a business opportunity, a phenomenal business opportunity. Because in the US, about 1/3 of American adults have some distressed debt. A total of $400 million owed by 77 million households. And banks are writing off about 10% of that a year. So there's an incredible opportunity here. So what that brings me to why am I here? What's CFSI about? What am I doing standing here in front of you? We exist to connect problems like Sarah and Sam's with solutions like Jerry's. And we do that in a number of ways. I know Jerry because he was part of our Financial Solutions Lab, which is a fintech incubator that we established in partnership with JPMorgan Chase. And we gathered a group of 9 entrepreneurs like Jerry, and we leveraged as many resources as we could to help them be successful. Right now, we're in the selection process for our second cohort of participants in the fintech lab. We also lead a network, not dissimilar to the network that's here, of financial institutions, large, small, for-profit, nonprofit, who are invested in building financial health. We believe that financial health is when you have the day-to-day systems in place that enable you to weather ups and downs, to build resilience, and also to take advantage of opportunity over time. And we think financial health is a shared value issue. When you think about Sam and Sarah, you have to realize these are your neighbors, but they're also your employees, they're your customers, and helping them be financially strong is a fundamental business issue for a whole range of businesses. If you're a hospital, Sam and Sarah are your nurses, your lab technicians, your doctors, your administrators. They're also your patients. The same can be said if you're an educational institution, right? These are your students. These are your teachers. So we hope that you all will be inspired to think more about financial health in the work that you do. And as you do so, that you'll think of CFSI as a partner. Thank you. Oh, good.